welcome back to the second session in our workshop. Our first speaker is Sacha Altay, who is a PhD student in cognitive science at the Institut Jean Nicod at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris. And he works on understanding the role of epistemic reputation and mechanism of and cognitive mechanisms in the spread of information and misinformation. He is very well published. I will post a link to his to his homepage after the talk. I just transfer the right of speech to you, Sacha.
Hi everyone, I will share my screen. Up. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So hi, my name is Sacha Altay. I'm very happy to be here. And today I will present how some of my work can help explain the spread of fake news. So we know from the literature that fake news in red are created to be very appealing to the human mind. For example, they contain more novel content, and they are also more surprising and more disgusting than true news that has been fact-checked. Fake news also tend to be about celebrities, threats, sex, disgust, and more generally, social information. For instance, this was the most shared fake news on Facebook in France in 2017 or 2018. Women developed IQ of 220 after drinking sperm every day for a year. These were the most popular fake news on Facebook in the US in 2018. For instance, Donald Trump ends school shootings by banning schools. And again, these popular fake news stories are mostly about social information, sex, and these kind of things. So just like the stories we used to tell by the fire, fake news are created to be captivating and very appealing to the human mind. So I'm not saying that they are not dangerous, especially when they undermine trust in mainstream media. What I'm saying right now is that fake news tend to be very appealing to the human mind. However, despite their psychological attractiveness, numerous articles have shown that the average internet user consumes very few fake news and rarely share any. So with my director, Hugo Mercier, we asked, why do so few people share fake news? Like, if they are so attractive and so appealing to the human mind, why do so few people share them? Our main hypothesis was that to benefit from communication, receivers should trust less people sharing fake news. But if the costs of sharing falsehoods were equal to the benefits of sharing truths, we would end up trusting people misleading us half of the time. So we hypothesized that sharing fake news should hurt one's reputation in a way that is hard to fix by sharing true news. Otherwise, it's too easy. So I'm going to present the results of this paper published a few months ago. So we tested this hypothesis in 4 pre-registered experiments among 3,600 participants in the US and the UK. We had 4 conditions. Participants were either presented with 3 real news stories, 3 fake news stories, 3 real news stories and 1 fake news stories, or 3 fake news story and 1 real news story. This is a between subject design. The news were either presented in a Facebook format and either came from an individual such as Charlie, who shared a post, or a made-up media outlet such as css.cu. After being presented with the news, participants had to rate how reliable the source who shared the news was. So the y-axis represents how much participants trusted the source who shared the news. We see that for politically neutral news, there is a cost to sharing a fake news in addition to 3 real news. People trust less the source who shared the fake news. On the other hand, people don't trust much more a source who shared 1 true news in addition to 3 fake news. You see that the orange slope, representing the reputational costs of sharing 1 fake news, is steeper than the green slope, representing the benefits of sharing 1 true news. And this is true for both politically congruent and politically incongruent news. All the orange slope are steeper than the green slopes. So as predicted, the reputational costs of sharing fake news are higher than the reputational benefits of sharing true news. We also compare trust ratings that our participants gave to the trust ratings that Americans gave to junk media and mainstream media. This is the Pennycook and Rand PNAS paper. So basically, what we found is that the only source with ratings similar to mainstream media was the source who shared 3 real news. That is, sharing just 1 fake news was enough to be excluded from the mainstream media category. It's basically a very selective category. And we also found that sharing 1 real news is not enough to escape the junk media category, as even source sharing 3 fake news and 1 real news had similar trust rating to junk media. So we have seen that there are reputational costs associated with sharing fake news. But do these reputational costs explain why so few people actually share fake news? To answer this question, we asked participants how much they would have to be paid to share fake news. In one condition, participants were told that they would share the news anonymously. And in the other condition, that it would be from their personal social media account. So here's the amount of money that participants requested, from $0 here to more than 1,000. We see in red that most of the time, participants did not ask to be paid to share true news, and that the difference between the anonymous and the personal condition is minimal. On the other hand, most participants asked to be paid to share fake news. When participants' reputation was on the line, in particular in this condition, half of the time participants asked to be paid more than $1,000 to share fake news, and they were only willing to share it for free 20% of the time, compared to 40% of the time when it was anonymous. We replicated this pattern with another set of fake news. A few take-home messages from this study. First, a good reputation is more easily lost than gained, but we kind of already knew that. And because receivers are vigilant and keep track of who said what, sharing fake news hurts your epistemic reputation, whether you are a human or media outlet. The reputational benefits of sharing true news are smaller than the reputational costs of sharing fake news. And people are aware of these reputational costs and refrain from sharing fake news when their reputation is on the line. However, a small number of fake news are indeed shared by a lot of people. We've seen during the COVID-19 pandemic that, for example, the fake news that COVID-19 was a bioweapon that has been developed and released by China was like really popular. The same goes for Bill Gates and the microchips implants to fight COVID. So one intuitive answer could be that because people can tell truth from falsehood, like people are stupid. I will answer no. I will argue that people are actually pretty good on average are telling fake news from true news. So for example, this is one study, and you can see in yellow the accuracy rating of fake news, and in gray the accuracy rating of real news. And basically what they show is that people are pretty good at making the difference between fake news and real news, in the sense that fake news are rated as way less accurate than true news. And this pattern has been replicated among politically congruent, politically discordant, in many sets of fake news. Basically, people intuitively, on average, are pretty good at making the difference between true news and fake news. I say on average because it doesn't mean that everyone is good at doing that. However, there is also a known dissociation between accuracy ratings and sharing intentions. People share news stories they think are inaccurate and don't share news stories they think are accurate. So there are some fake news that they know are inaccurate and that they share nonetheless. And there are some true news that they know to be true that they don't share. Another illustration of the accuracy sharing gap in this study. So people seem to be somewhat as likely to consider sharing true and fake news, even though they deem true news way more accurate than fake news. Why is that? Why would people share inaccurate news, in other words? This is puzzling, I think, only if one assumes that the goal of human communication is sharing accurate information. I will argue that it's not. For instance, if I tell you I have a prime number of geraniums in my garden, it's accurate, but how relevant is it? Like, how informative, how likely would you be to share it? Probably not at all. So human communication, I argue, is governed, and I'm not like, it's not my idea, it's Dan Sperber and linguists' idea that human communication is governed by expectations of relevance, not only truthfulness. Relevance encompasses the perceived plausibility of a piece of information, so it's not completely orthogonal to truthfulness, but it also encompasses the effect the information would have if it were true. I'm leaving the cognitive cost aside. So, for instance, it is highly implausible that politicians are lizards coming from outer space. But the effect it would have if they were effectively lizards coming from outer space is enormous. Just despite the low plausibility of this statement and conspiracy theory, it is probably more relevant than my statement on Geronimus, and thus more likely to be popular on internet and more likely to be shared. Right now, I'm going to present the results of the following paper with Emma and Hugo Mercier. If this account is true, it is enormously wonderful. Interestingness if true, and the sharing of true and fake news. So we had 3 experiments, 45 news, true and fake, related to COVID-19, 900 participants recruited and prolific academic. We asked participants 3 questions. Well, actually, we asked more, but I'm only going to talk about these 3. To the best of your knowledge, how accurate is the claim in the above headline? So basically, we measured accuracy. How likely would you be to share this story online? And imagine that the claim made in the above headline is true, even if you find it implausible. If the claim were true for sure, how interesting would it be? So this is an example of a fake news. Again, it's a Facebook format, and an example of a true news. Here are the results for the accuracy. Again, we find that true news in blue are rated as more accurate than fake news in pink. So basically, many studies have shown that this is not new. We also find that fake news are a little more interesting if true than true news. The effect is not large. It's not as large as the accuracy effect, which is extremely large. It's just like a medium to small effect. And again, we find that participants were not more likely to share, they were slightly more likely to share true news, but the effect is extremely small in this case. Just like Penny Cook and many others have found it in the past, there is a very small difference in the intention to share true and fake news. Now, here on the y-axis is how people were willing to share. And here it's interesting how interesting, if true, a news is. So we see a strong positive correlation. So the more a news is interesting if true, the more participants were willing to share it. Here I'm talking about true and fake news together. And the more a news was accurate, the more participants were willing to share it. We see that the effect of interestingness if true is a little stronger than the effect of accuracy. So participants were more willing to share news that were more interesting if true, and news that were more accurate. These 2 factors explain approximately 22% of the variance, if I remember correctly. Now I'm going to show you both interestingness if true and accuracy at the same time. So for example, here will be the news that are not interesting if true and not accurate. Here, the news that are not accurate at all, but extremely interesting if true. The more blue the squares will be, the more participants were to share it. We see that participants were more likely to share news that were both interesting if true and both more accurate. So basically we have an interaction. Participants were more likely, so for example here it's the news that are one of the most interesting news of the year, if true, and that are also very accurate. Here are the news that are not accurate at all, but that would be very interesting. A few take-home messages from this study. We think that people could share fake news because it has other qualities that make up for its questionable accuracy. It's true that people, when they share fake news, they don't necessarily think about accuracy, but we think that they may have in mind other qualities that the news has. It's basically what I'm saying is that sharing fake news is probably not just a mistake. Fake news are popular because they have some qualities, and I think we need to study these qualities. And in particular, we argued that fake news could be very interesting if true, like most conspiracy theory, I think, and that this interestingness, if true, could make up for the lack of perceived accuracy of fake news. This is just one factor among, I think, many. Think about if vitamin C was effectively a cure against COVID-19, like it would be extremely interesting and it would have a tremendous impact. If alcohol was a cure against COVID-19, it would have been amazing. And if coronavirus was really a bioweapon released by China, it would have had enormous political and social consequences. So these news are interesting, even though they are not plausible. And that's why I think people share them and discuss them. Because also social media is a place where people want to create bond and discuss with others. So these, I think, are news that are very good to discuss with others. And I want to share I want to zoom out, and I'm finished my last slide. So I think that when zooming out and taking into account the big picture, we should be more worried about the large share of people who don't trust and consume reliable news, rather than the few people who trust and consume unreliable news. And I think that misinformation is probably better characterized as a symptom of low trust rather than a cause. Thank you for your attention.
Okay. Thank you very much. Please, yeah, use the raising the hand raising. Let's start with Glenn. Let us unmute you.
So that was actually not a question. I was just applauding. So I'm really sorry.
Okay, so let's see. Giacomo, please. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sacha, for this presentation. It was very, very interesting. But I was wondering, I was noticing how you talked about, especially like the sharing of fake news, right? And the reasons why people share fake news, basically, like they might have different motivations. So I might share a piece of misinformation because I find it funny or ridiculous, for instance, and I would share it, right? But then I guess the problem then I guess would become that there isn't a shared, ironically, a shared understanding of why people share things on Facebook, right? More than simply about, is this piece of information accurate or inaccurate? So isn't it like, I really appreciate your work, but then isn't this just shifting the problem, you could say, about how to interpret people's behavior online depending on how they behave? Because I might share something with very different motivations, right? Mm-hmm. How would you kind of deal with that? How would you move on from there?
Yeah, I think this is the big question. Like, we know close to nothing about fake news reception and how people actually, like, in everyday life and in pragmatic terms and in ecological settings, like when people perceive fake news or share them, like what's really happening in their mind, what's their communicative intention, what are they trying to do? I think we know very little about that, and we often start, I think, with normative premises such as that I don't know, people should not share inaccurate information, and people will share inaccurate information without knowing, and they will do so maybe to manipulate others or whatever. But I think that most of the time it might just be like social motivations that just have nothing to do with accuracy. So I think it is absolutely central to study that. And I'm not sure, maybe I'm wrong, but I think we don't really know, and it needs to be studied badly.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Regina, please, you're next.
Hi, sorry, I'm gonna get the microphone hooked up. So I don't have everything set up today, so I'm not on camera yet. It was really, really interesting. Thank you so much for the talk. I had a question just about the first set of data you presented and about how much people wanted to be paid to share news. And what I was really struck by was the fact that people wanted to be paid $1,000 even to share true stories. And so I was just wondering, based upon the research you've done, what you think is going on there. Do people have a sense of like, this is my social media feed, how dare you ask me to share information, even true information? Or is it more like, this is like the Instagram influencer economy and people think, well, this is now just how you make money? Anyway, I was just kind of curious. It seems like an interesting starting point to ask people's motivations. Why do they want to be compensated even to share true information? Thank you.
Thanks. So it's a great question, but I think first, we found these results are interesting when interpreted in relative terms. So for example, when you compare between conditions, because I think most participants would actually have to be paid less than what they say to actually do what they do. So I don't think it should be interpreted in absolute terms. What's interesting is the difference between the condition and the difference between fake news and true news. But I also think that there is a deeper problem, which is that we have studied why people share things, but many people don't share anything. And many people are really scared of sharing things on specific social media in particular, such as, for example, LinkedIn, or on specific things. People don't share anything because they're really scared about their reputation. And so I think there is something to it. Some people might really have to be paid a lot to share a fake news on LinkedIn. I would personally have, I think, to be shared a lot to do that. And the same goes for Twitter. So I think there is something interesting that goes beyond my study, which is that, yeah, some people don't want to share anything online except on private chats or like WhatsApp. And that's also why we study misinformation on these public platforms where reputation is huge. But on smaller groups, it might be completely different. And I don't know how much we can generalize what we know from Facebook and Twitter to WhatsApp. So it's not a clear answer, but yeah, it's a really interesting question.
Okay, the next, thank you. The next question is from Slava. Slava, are you there? I can't see you because you didn't raise your hand, but you wanted to ask a question. Okay, so let's move to Isaac. And Slava, if you're there, just raise your hand and I'll give you the right to speak.
Thanks, Sacha, for a very interesting talk. This confirms some of our suspicions and maybe puts some questions to some others, which is really nice. I have a couple of things I'm interested in, but let me focus on one. I'm interested in how you're cashing out interesting if true, right? Like what defines interestingness, right? I'm worried that this might be circular, right? Just the things that we talk about are the things we talk about. So does this tell us anything new? I presume that the answer might have something to do with communities, with shared interests, but I would be very interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Yes. So I'm not an expert, but we borrowed this concept from relevance theory. And the idea is more of what effect this information would have if true. So what are the inferences that you will be able to draw if the information is true? So it can be reinforcing your priors, revising your priors, but basically do something to, and for example, when something is extremely surprising, if true, it means that it would completely change your priors or do something like that. So I think we can have kind of a computational definition like that, which is basically how much it changes your prior or reinforce them. But I'm not an expert of relevance theory, so I'm sorry, I don't have like a very good computational definition.
You're muted, Boaz.
Okay, so now let's try Slava. Slava, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, ask your question.
Hello. First of all, it was very interesting. I just want to ask, after you studied and did your research, why you think there is a claim that the election in the US was influenced by fake news? If the normal men and women know how to understand if it's fake or not fake, as you pointed.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm really interested in this question, and I'm more and more writing on and studying misinformation and why is it so appealing. So I think that the narrative that, for example, Trump has been elected because of fake news was particularly popular among Democrats, who were just like, what happens, like what can go on in Republicans' mind to make them elect this guy? Like it's not like they cannot be just rational agents. There must be something. There must be like, they must have been brainwashed, so that something must have happened. And fake news was just it's an easy culprit. It's like, it's fake news. So I think it's really, because I don't think Republicans believe that Trump was elected because of fake news. It's mainly Democrats. So I think, yeah, it's just, and it's a monocausal explanations. And we know that there is a third person effect, that you believe that others are more influenced by fake news than you are. And you believe that it is even stronger when it's the outgroup. So basically, Democrats believe that Democrats will be less influenced by fake news, but that Republicans will be even more influenced by fake news. So I think all these factors contribute to these popular narratives about alarmist narrative on fake news that are not completely false, because maybe it played a role, but clearly he wasn't elected because of fake news.
Okay, thank you. Axel.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm interested in what your framework, or what you within your framework make of the phenomenon of blue lies. So basically lies being told that you might know to be false, but you do it so as to demonstrate that you are willing to even perhaps sacrifice your reputation for truthfulness and still remain a member of your group. So, I mean, that seems to be something which might even, speak to the question of Democrats versus Republicans. You share something which, of course, any reasonable person knows to be false or very far-fetched, but you do it so as to demonstrate that you're one of them, or that you're part of the club, that you're a true, blue Republican or something like that.
Yeah, I find it very appealing and very fun. I think that it explains parts of why the minority of people, and even why probably Trump lies so much. Like, it's this paper in the sociological paper on the appealing of the authentic liar, that lying against the establishment will make you appear more authentic. And you also have this burning bridges hypothesis, where when you tell falsehoods, you burn bridges with people who think this falsehood are stupid, but it's a way to reinforce your, I think I completely agree with that. And since fake news are shared by a very small minority of people who are very active, it can be them, like, it can be like, but I don't think that, for example, the top fake news on Facebook were shared for this reason, because most of them were just really appealing, and I think ordinary users probably shared it. And there is also probably very little reputational costs for sharing these ones. When they are obviously funny and things like that, maybe the reputational costs are lower. And sometimes, yeah, the reputational cost can be a reason to share, because the reputational cost will show that you're a good group member. So yeah, I completely agree.
Okay, thank you. We have last question is to Laida. We have more people that want to ask questions than we can accommodate. So I apologize for those who didn't get the chance. Last question, Laida Ruvina.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Very, very interesting online web conference so far, and especially Sacha, very interesting presentation. I have just one thought. In dictatorships, we know there is misinformation, we know there is propaganda, we know there is censorship, but also we can see that, for example, the example of the strongest democracy in the world, such as the American one, we can see that the person who were involved in conspiracy theorists, when asked by journalists if they were conscious that their beliefs were actually conspiracy, said, yeah, we know, but it's okay, especially after January the 6th. So when you said that we know very little actually about the reasons why people share this, I was wondering just about these two differences. So in communism, people may be fooled, but they don't know. So the moment that the Berlin Wall fell down, there was this kind of disappointment. It was like, my parents believed it, my grandfather believed it. So it wasn't true. This kind of perfect society wasn't true. And now we have the opposite, we have an opposite or just kind of different situation. People believe in some fake news, and they don't even bother to say, no, I am the truth, and all the other rest is wrong. They just can't, they're okay with that. So what do you think about this? This being aware of knowing that you are not on the science side, but on fiction, but that's okay with you.
Okay, Sacha, very quickly.
Yeah, so I think part of the answer is in Alex's suggestion that endorsing falsehood can have like social and signaling functions. I think it's part of the answer, but it's not the best one. And we start knowing about the motivations of people to share fake news, but I was talking more specifically also about the reception. So really what's happening in people's mind when they read fake news, and not just asking about accuracy and a few things, but really like, and also sharing like really their communicative intentions, like what do they exactly mean? But I'm sorry, your question is too complex for me to answer shortly, and even if I had time, I couldn't answer correctly, I think. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Let us thank Sacha for a very stimulating talk.